Let us continue with our discussion from yesterday. And you see that we have a picture gxy, and we have the Fourier transform. I have shown the magnitude of Fourier transform. And then I have shown a sampling mask where the Fourier transform was actually measured. Okay. And it happens to be only 1/4 of the samples as number of pixels. All right. And then I said that since Fourier transform is a linear transform, it's a linear set of equations we have, which we generally try to invert when we invert a Fourier transform data. Okay. But now, since we have only n/4 samples, we have not measured all the n samples. Our task is now to take n/4 equations to find n unknowns. Okay. And so if you try to solve the minimum error solution, I was saying that this is the kind of solution you get, which is shown on the rightmost image here. Okay.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, as you have said, the degree of freedom, what do you mean by the degree of freedom in this context?
So degree of freedom is just, you can say, is number of numbers you require to specify the signal. Okay.
The minimum number, I guess.
The minimum number, yes.
Okay.
So it's not about, it's a kind of a communication kind of language that you don't think about, how many are needed to represent it visually, but you kind of think that you want to either store the picture or you want to communicate the picture to somebody else. So it could be any other signal as well. It could be a speech signal that will also have degrees of freedom. Okay. And you need to have an idea of how many numbers are needed to save this signal so that it can be communicated. And this is very important because, the resources used in communication are in some sense proportional to how much information you are sending. Okay. So if I can store same information in less numbers, it is always better for communication purposes. Okay. Any form of communication, electronic communication, will require you to have the data in some numerical form. And so if you are sending image to somebody else, a picture or something, your mobile company has to worry about, how many bits of information need to be sent actually, so that the information is transmitted more or less accurately and serves the purpose. Okay. So in that sense, I'm using the word degrees of freedom.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So now, I'm going to blow up this image, zoom this image a little more, this minimum error solution. But you can see that I wanted like G with this data. If I just solve for minimum error kind of solution, I end up getting something like this, which is not bad, but I probably don't want to use it for any application. If it is a sensitive application like healthcare or something, so this is a important thing, that if I get these incoherent, these grainy artifacts on top, then I think people would rather have this image, the first image, than the second image if you want to use it for some application. Okay. So let us look at it in this penalty function perspective. And what you can see is that, if you take total variation of the minimum error solution versus total variation of the solution that you are kind of seeking, then you see that total variation of this minimum error solution will be much larger than total variation of this good solution. So why do you think it is larger? Again, do you agree with me that total variation will be larger, first of all? Hello, can somebody answer?
Because the picture is blurred.
It is not really blurred. If you look at the features, the features like this, is it really blurred? They are there. Okay, but
And the grainy.
Yeah, there is a lot of noise on top of it. And as a result, if I took gradients at all pixels and add up all those numbers, then quickly the number will rise to a very high value. Okay. Whereas in the second picture, the gradients will exist only at the boundaries between 0 and 1. And so in the gradient domain, the second picture is much more sparser than the first picture. And as a result, meaning you can see that I can apply my usual trick of applying total variation as a penalty. Okay. So here I'm saying that again, let us formulate the problem as cost function minimization, where I have data available on this matrix M, which is a mask function. So this M matrix is only a binary function. It has value of either 1 or 0. It is 1 where we are measuring Fourier transform and 0 where we are not measuring Fourier transform. Okay. And then since we are expecting a solution, a good solution to have sparsity in the gradient domain, then I can say that, well, I can pose this problem in my usual fashion that I want this norm squared error to be reduced with a penalty on total variation. Again, you see that when I have measured much less, there is a possibility of having large, meaning infinite solutions essentially. If you have more unknowns than number of equations in some sense, as it is here, then there is really no unique solution. And the solution that you are seeking is provided to you by the constraint that you choose. Okay. And so if I don't choose any constraint, I will get the minimum error solution. If I choose a constraint, I may get something else. By the way, here again, if you look at the gradient G star, then the first term has a F dagger. And essentially, F dagger, which is the Fourier transform operation dagger, is the same as F inverse. Can somebody tell me why this is so? So in some sense, the Fourier transform matrix is actually a unitary matrix. And so if it is unitary, then F dagger F is going to be 1 or identity matrix. And as a result, F dagger will be essentially F inverse. Okay. So in this case, the F transpose, F dagger is actually the inverse transform. In the deblurring case, you saw that it is not an inverse, but it is actually a transpose operation. The transpose operation is not inverse, but for Fourier transform, it happens so that the transpose operation is also an inverse operation because of the unitarity property. Okay. And so if I solve this problem, I see something very interesting that I am showing you. Okay. So I had my GXY, and then I have the minimum error solution. And if I solve for the minimum error plus TV solution, I get something really nice compared to the minimum error solution. Although since I had added some noise on the data, I found that for some alpha that I was using, there were a few pixels which were a little bit brighter. So I just adjusted the display range, and you see that the final picture here is essentially identical to the first picture. Okay. Now this actually opens up a really fundamental question that are we somehow violating the sampling theorem, because tradition, or in some sense you see that this degrees of freedom, or the product in Fourier space times product in the length space, this is really like an uncertainty product. And we are essentially saying that, this is a new form of uncertainty principle, essentially, that if the signal that you are looking at is sparse, then lesser measurements, linear measurement should still work. And if the reconstruction is achieved via an optimization problem. Okay, so what we are saying is this idea that n unknowns require n equations is an old idea. And I think if we are going to go with optimization like approaches, then we can think that, okay, I can do with less measurements and I can essentially achieve the same reconstruction for all practical purposes. And meaning you see in this example that we have used only 25% measurements and we are still at the end at the same result. And so if you look at my slide yesterday, where I said that there is these two paths. One is where I actually make all the measurements. Here, and then traditionally I will get the image and I will save. But here I have unconventional kind of imager where I don't measure all the measurements. I don't take data at all the measurement points and measure much less, but via reconstruction, I should reach the same picture. So in the end, if I put this whole system in a black box, then for the user, it does not matter how this was obtained, as long as you get the same image back. Okay. This point clear? So we are in a way not violating per se the sampling theorem, because sampling theorem suggested that if your extent in Fourier space is 2b and extent in length space is 2l, then typically you should have 2b times 2l samples. Or here, as if it is 2D signal, then it will be 2b squared times 2l squared. But what it does not assume the generic result like sampling theorem. What it does not assume is it does not assume anything about the nature of the image that we are trying to recover. Okay, so if we have put it by hand that the nature of the image we are recovering has, for example, TV based sparsity, then it should make sense that much lesser number of measurements should actually be fine. Okay. Is this clear to everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So it's a fundamentally new perspective of looking at imaging, where the idea of brute force measurements to increase resolution or to get more performance it's kind of sidetracked for a better mathematics. But it also seems funny that for say MRI systems were introduced say 40 years ago, but meaning all this time they were measuring more data because we were doing somewhat poor mathematics. But now if you improve the mathematics of how the image is reconstructed, then now you can start thinking about systems which have much less data measurements. And so they can do the scans faster, they can do, meaning there are multiple ways when, or you can achieve systems at much lesser cost. Okay. So I'm going to go over two interesting examples today where you might think that I have been applying TV to these IIT Delhi logo and things like that, but is there any real situation where this is applied? So I will show you some work in MRI, and then I will also show you some work related to the black hole imaging. Okay, and which in fact meaning I have used the logo image here, but I might as well have used the MRI example, or I might as well have used the black hole example in place of the IIT Delhi example, because from the mathematical standpoint or image reconstruction standpoint, these problems, as you will see, are identical. Okay. So the first case, I have one slide introduction to what is MRI. Are you people familiar with the notion of NMR, or nuclear magnetic resonance?
Yes, sir.
Or Larmor frequencies and things like that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes. So what MRI is so the word nuclear has been removed from the system's name, magnetic resonance imaging, because just if the nuclear name is there, then people are afraid of it. So although what we are doing in MRI system is playing with the nuclear spins. Okay. So suppose you have see lot of constituents in your body are meaning carbohydrates, and so hydrogen atoms are kind of abundant. Okay, so in any tissue or blood or everywhere, hydrogen atoms are in abundance. And so if you put So if somebody sleeps in this MRI scanner table and you put the part of body that is of interest inside this circle, which is actually a large magnet, what you do is suppose you put an axial magnetic field B0 along the z-axis. So z-axis is along along this axis where the patient is sleeping. Okay, and so if you have a stationary magnetic field, what will happen is all the magnetic moments in the body, meaning all the hydrogen nuclei, will align to this magnetic field after stable equilibrium. Okay. So what the scanner does is actually applies a RF pulse to flip these nuclei. So it provides the right energy to flip the nuclei, and so as these nuclei again come back to rest with equilibrium with the magnetic field, then you have a transverse magnetization MXY, and this MXY it will actually the magnetic moment in XY direction will slowly relax, and it will again align to the magnetic field. Okay, and so while this is relaxing, there is a time signal that is picked up by some other RF coils, and this time domain signal is related to the spatial frequency in the image. Okay, so this is a whole interesting field. So there are books on it, but for us, the important thing right now for just this course is that the signal that you receive in coils is related to the SK, where K is the basically 2 pi fx and 2 pi fy. Okay, and so once you have the Fourier data, then you will like to do computation and do the image reconstruction. Now this is a very simple bare bones kind of picture I have shown, but things are a little more complicated. There are multiple coils around the patient. There are about 8 or 16 coils, and they are all collecting data simultaneously. Now, if you had just the constant magnetic field, then everywhere the precision frequency or the Larmor frequency will be same. So instead of having a constant magnetic field along z-axis, what is done is you actually try to give a gradient to this magnetic field. So it may be the field is B0 plus some gradient along z-axis. So as a result, when the patient is sleeping in this magnetic field, if it's lying down on this table at different z locations, the Larmor frequency is actually different. So as you are exciting, you can excite the nuclei in one plane at a time, and you can do a sequence of excitations, and you can get information plane by plane, or there are now more advanced sequences where whole 3D Fourier transform is collected. But I think the main idea is that the data that you get are the currents in the coils, which have both amplitude and phase, and then you actually organize the data so that it becomes the Fourier transform of the image, and then a computation is done to get the image. Okay. But now you can see that since this is done sequentially by getting signals in time, if you can measure less data, then hopefully the scan time is actually going to be much more reduced. So if I actually decide to take 1/4 data, then the scan can be done in 1/4 time. The second way you can think about is, I can take less measurements, but I can spread the measurements over a larger Fourier space. And so if I take the same time, I can hope to have a larger resolution in the image, okay, that I'm trying to acquire. Okay. And so here is something I'm going to show as a work, meaning one illustration of MRI, where here is actually out of my own work about 8 years ago now. So here is the first result is full data is somebody's brain. The blood vessels are there, and you can see if you do traditional reconstruction based on full n pixel data in Fourier space, then actually this is the picture that the doctor wants to see. If there is any blockage in the brain, if there is any tumor there, then the blood flow will actually show as blocked and things like that. And as a result, if you look at this image, people can know if there is some problem. Okay. But if you now take the n by 4, like n by 4 data, then you see that a minimum error reconstruction is actually very poor quality, meaning you have lost a lot of features, things are faint, and this image, it still retained sort of the main features, but the fine vasculature images are not there. And so it is not a very good image for diagnosis. However, if you do the sparse reconstruction, so the work in this paper that I did 8 years ago, or maybe 9 years ago now, the main focus was to have a reconstruction where there is no alpha parameter, okay, in the regularization term. And so can you do such reconstructions where there is no tuning required and things happen in an automated way? And anyway, I'll not go into that topic in this class, but anyway, this is a practical reconstruction of somebody's brain. And you can see that the sparse data reconstruction or less data reconstruction is essentially same as the full data reconstruction. So for the doctor, really, there is no difference whether you have collected full data or only 25% data. So in a way, if you can achieve this, you should be able to build hardware that costs much less. In a way, you can think about simpler MRI systems. Definitely, the reconstruction will require more efforts. Data computation would essentially just inverse Fourier transform. But now that you have to solve this problem, you have to solve it as an optimization. And if that can be done at a reasonable computational effort, then this is a viable option for such a system. Okay. Do you get this point, or you have some questions on this?
Sir?
Yes.
Suppose there will be some I'm not able to understand, is there when we introduce a TV penalty to do this kind of imaging, usually I would expect, like, if we want to create an n size data from an n/4 data, there will be a one-to-many mapping, so we won't actually get to the answer, but we might get somewhere nearby.
Okay.
So but when we are doing TV, it is almost as if we are directly getting to the right answer. So
Yes.
is there something inherently physical that we ignore in our like n equation, n variable system?
Yes,
Or
so we ignore the fact that the signal we are trying to reconstruct does not actually have n unknowns. So when we are thinking about n unknowns and n equations, we are essentially neglecting the fact that the solution we are seeking has some structure to it. We are just trying to solve a generic problem. Whereas when you are doing work on an application, you are trying to look for images of certain kind. They are not completely generic images, but there is a structure, and as a result of the structure in the solution, you see that there is highly, meaning I have been using these words, degrees of freedom, or the redundancy in signals and things like that. But the point is that many times when we study or many times when we use applications or devices where we have to acquire an image, most likely the images do have redundancy or less degrees of freedom. And so this kind of framework suggests a complete rethink on how we measure anything. Okay, so what we are missing so far in our equipment design and things like that is that we just think that it's a general signal that we are trying to recover, but many times the signal that we are trying to recover is not the most generic signal, but it's actually so if you think about n-dimensional vector space, the signal is essentially we can't tell. So what is interesting here is that beforehand when we are trying to, we just have the data, we don't really know which subspace it is. So for example, I don't know the image, so I don't know which pixels will have high gradients and which pixels will have low gradients in the final image. But all I'm saying is, if we penalize it this way, the solution, you tell the algorithm that I want to have high penalty for a signal which may have a large total variation, or for example, in this magnetic resonance work, I did use basically wavelet domain sparsity, but essentially it's the same thing, but to some extent is equivalent. And what we are saying is that in any technology that we think that we measure something, we really have to pay attention to this fact that less data is actually not always bad. And if it is, the less data is measured in a careful way, and if reconstruction is formulated as a separate problem, then actually it is not inconceivable that you can actually get the same information from much less measurements. Okay, is that clear?
Yes, sir.
But now, this is fine. You might say, okay, that there was still a possibility of actually collecting full data, isn't it? In this case, in the MRI case, there was a possibility that I could have measured all the data. So if somebody is very, very fussy about it, I might as well measure all the data and get reconstruction. Maybe it takes a little more time to collect the data for the scan time. But if somebody says I don't trust your algorithm, I have the possibility to actually collect more data. But let's take the next example, which is very interesting. I think all of you have seen, heard about the Event Horizon Telescope, or no? Or the black hole picture that was published in press last year.
Yes, sir.
Most of you have seen it, or somebody has not seen it. Okay. Okay, so let's see how that reconstruction works, because you will be surprised that essentially what we are doing here is the same thing that is being done in the Event Horizon Telescope. Okay. So let us see how Event Horizon Telescope even works. Okay, so what you have is these antennas that are located at different places on Earth, in different continents. In fact, are you familiar with the NCRA facility in Pune, the National Center for Radio Astronomy? Have you heard about
Yes,
the
sir.
NCRA TIFR? Yes.
Yes, sir.
So it is actually, it is a large antenna array of radio antennas, which is spread over several kilometers. But here the project is, so Event Horizon Telescope is same essentially, but it is even more ambitious that the antennas are actually spread over different continents. Okay, so there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 antennas. Okay. And how do you, does anybody know how the signal is collected so that the black hole image is formed? Is each antenna looking at a black hole, or what is being done? Do you know that? So anyway, there is a fundamental result called Van Sittert and Zernike theorem. So if you are interested in the next semester, generally I teach this class on statistical optics, coherence theory, and things like that, where I teach this theorem. But the theorem is very interesting. That suppose I have an incoherent source, which is spatially incoherent, for example. So here people are trying to image the radiation from black hole just out of its the Schwarzschild radius. And so this radiation is essentially spatially incoherent at the location of the black hole. Okay, but so let us suppose that this IXY, as you see equation 72, IXY is the image that you want to recover. And what you do is you actually, so X prime, Y prime here are coordinates in the black hole plane, meaning near the black hole. Okay, transverse coordinates. And R1, R2 are going to be coordinates on Earth. Okay, so R1 may be coordinate at one antenna and R2 may be coordinate at second antenna. Okay, and so these radio antennas will, if focused, to look at certain direction, will all see some field. Okay, so this electric field that is received by the antenna, I'm going to denote by ER1 or ER2. Okay, and the result is very interesting. The Van Sittert-Zernike theorem. The result is that, oh, by the way, this Zernike is actually the same Zernike who also did the phase contrast microscope. Okay, so so that's a great few contributions you make, and all of them have something or else other to, for very different communities. Okay, so the Van-Sittard-Zernike theorem shows that so if you take a correlation of these two signals, so what do you do is you keep recording the field at antenna R1, and then you keep recording the field at R2. So you are actually recording field at all these antennas at the same time. Okay. And what happens is if you do correlation, which means you do an ensemble average or time average. So you take E star complex conjugate field at location R1 and E at R2. Okay, the field at R2. Okay, that is being collected. Okay, you multiply these two quantities, so E star R1 and E R2. Okay, and do a time average. All right. So over the time that you are looking at, you do an average. There is no ensemble here. There is only one place you are looking at. See, generally ensemble average means that you have multiple realizations of the same system, but under the ergodic hypothesis, you can say that I can do a long time average, and it will be essentially same as my ensemble average. Okay, so the idea is if you do this average is actually the coherence function called gamma R1 R2, but in this case you can show that if the source that you are imaging is actually incoherent, and this is a stationary process, somehow the gamma R1 R2 function is only a function of R1 minus R2. And what is interesting about this theorem is it also says that this correlation function is actually two-dimensional Fourier transform of this I x prime y prime. So if I x prime y prime is a pattern, the black hole image that I'm trying to recover, then I can take a 2D Fourier transform of that, and so R1 minus R2 will be vectors in now Fourier space. There is some other scaling factors like lambda and everything that I'm not including here, but essentially the vector R1 minus R2 decides a point in the Fourier space, and that is where. So if you look at two antennas at a particular time, then R1 minus R2, meaning the locations. R1 and R2 create a vector R1 minus R2, which is directed in Fourier space at some location. And so now you have multiple antennas, so you can have multiple pairs of such signals. And while this signal is being taken, the Earth is also rotating. So you have this information at multiple time points. Okay. And so on the right hand side, what I show is actually the Fourier space coverage. Okay, so it is written in this figure as UV coverage. But you see these different arcs, and if you see there are different colors there. So the color actually represents one pair of antennas essentially. Okay, and so what is shown here is actually the Fourier space coverage. So this mask, if you look at this as a mask, this is essentially same as our M mask. Okay, so the M mask that I used had this kind of pattern, which was ones and zeros, but now you have a pattern where mask is zero only along these arcs. Mask is one only along the arcs, and wherever this arc doesn't exist, your mask is essentially zero. So it is not just n by 4, but you have much meaning lesser sampling that is available. Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, I have a question. Is this Zernike theorem is only applicable to the two pairs of antennas, R1, R2?
Any two pairs, but in fact it could be any 2 points in space. Okay, so I can have any 2 points in space where the antenna is not there even, still this will apply. So I take 2 points R1, R2 here and here. They will still receive some E field from the what you are looking at, isn't it? At radio frequencies. And so R1, this theorem is true at any 2 points R1, R2 in space, in far field although. Okay, that's all. But now our R1, R2 is restricted because it is restricted by where the antennas are located. Okay, meaning I could wish that I want 10 more antennas, but it's a costly proposition. So, right now, the Event Horizon Telescope has 6 antennas and they look at this. Okay. But now let us look at, what is the advantage here? Because if you think about the NCRA telescope, then the R1 minus R2, the information is only spread over some, say, 10 kilometers area. Okay. And so the frequency coverage in Fourier space is going to be very close to the zero frequency. Whereas now, since these antennas are spread out so far apart over the Earth, now you can have a larger frequency coverage. Okay, and larger frequency coverage means what does larger frequency coverage mean? Who wants to take a chance? So suppose I could cover only a small area in this Fourier space versus I cover a much larger area in Fourier space. What is going to be the difference?
Sir, we have more information.
Well, clearly more information, but what is it going to do to the image that I recover? If I have samples of data that are at farther and farther place in Fourier space from the 0 frequency, then what is the advantage of that?
Increased clarity of image in the high frequency.
Increased resolution, isn't it? Yes. So what we have seen is in the Fourier transform when we did calculations, the resolution in image space is essentially meaning it is essentially 1 over the extent in Fourier space, isn't it? So if I have a larger extent or coverage in Fourier space, then it means that the delta x, in the image space is going to be smaller, and which means that I can resolve better actually. So compared to a single facility where there are large number of antennas, in that situation you will only sample the Fourier space near the DC, which is already a big feat, meaning when this kind of antennas are developed, it's already great to have such facilities. But if you can go even beyond this, meaning this is, you can see that the way the antennas are spread out, there are these vectors available, R1 minus R2, which are very, very large, and probably more larger in vector you cannot achieve on Earth. Then you have to have the antennas floating in space somewhere and give you the data and do the correlations that will give you bigger coverage in Fourier space, and you will get more resolution. Okay, but now you see that if you look at this picture on the right hand side, most of the Fourier spaces there is no data available, isn't it? It's only a very small section of Fourier space, maybe it's 1/10 or even less that the data is available. Okay. And here, even if I wish, I cannot really produce more data because, already this much data is, meaning it's already great to have even this much data. So in MRI, I could have said that, okay, it doesn't matter, I'm going to, image more in any case. But in this kind of situation, really, there is no data available, meaning this is the max data you can get. Okay. And so I'm going to show you, now you will be surprised, but I'm going to show you a paper from 2017 when people were modeling reconstruction of this type. And you can see the title of this paper. The title of this paper is, this is in Astrophysical Journal. Akiyama, Kazuo Akiyama is kind of a leader in this area right now. He has played a very important role in these reconstructions. So the images that you saw, they actually were reconstructed via some algorithms that Akiyama developed. But if you look at the title of the paper, it is imaging the Schwarzschild radius scale structure of M87 with Event Horizon Telescope using, you see the word sparse modeling. Okay, so it's exactly what I've been talking about a little bit earlier for last 2 classes. Okay. Now here inherently data is not there, so you can't really have anything better than that. But what caught my attention also in this paper is the equation 10. I will put this paper in Moodle, but you look at the equation 10. What do you see there? I here is the image that you are trying to recover. Okay. What do you see in equation 10 there? So this equation 10 is out of this paper. All right. What is it?
So total variation.
It is total variation, isn't it? It is I of I plus 1j minus ij whole square plus I of ij plus 1 minus ij whole square root, and then summed over all ij's, okay, on all pixels. So essentially, and you can see, if you can read there, you can see that TV is a good indicator of image sparsity in its gradient domain instead of the image domain, and TV is highly affected by spatial resolution and all that. You can read this paper, but essentially you see that this was the model for the black hole, and then this is what based on what is the PSF, effective PSF that is computed for this kind of system, meaning based on the coverage and frequency space, you see that they were expecting an image of this kind. Clean is an old algorithm in this space to try to recover data, but it is an algorithm like deconvolution, and it is somehow equivalent to, it's not exactly least square problem, but it's more like it is modeled as maximum likelihood kind of problem. So log likelihood and things like that are used. But you can say effectively it is a weighted least square kind of algorithm. And so if you do that, if this data, if you use the clean algorithm, you will see that this is the image that you get. But if the same data now, if you apply total variation additionally, this is the picture that, these are the kind of pictures you saw in the press. Okay. So today, the understanding of what the black hole looks like, is really heavily dependent on what the penalty function is. So total variation has come to rescue again, and somehow the image that you see is. So meaning the point is that if I give you the Fourier space data, meaning I know it's not straightforward to set up such a system and get the data. There will be a lot of different kinds of adjustments on time and the noise correction. So it's a whole people spend decades to actually get this data in good shape, and so that you can apply this kind of reconstruction. So it is not at all straightforward to apply, get this data and apply the image reconstruction algorithm. But you see that this principle is very, very powerful. Meaning it is powerful from from the MRI scanners to all the way to the black holes. So you have to kind of say that these big discoveries, big things today, they are all relying on. And so this idea of total variation, if it was not there, then the thing is you could not actually reconstruct the black hole. And so I think what I'm teaching you here is very, very powerful in that sense. That in a sense, I can say that this imaging of black hole was enabled by effectively finally this algorithm. Meaning, you see, both the things are important here. The setting of hardware is important, and the algorithm, both are important. If you have only the hardware, you only have correlations at most, but it does not give you the image itself. Because even if you have the less data, you just use your typical inversion and you get really bad picture here, as you can see. So the algorithm is equally important, but algorithm cannot live without the instrument itself. Okay, so it is not just image processing, that I already had an image and you can actually get something out of it. So I can tell you something, that if you use this clean image, this clean algorithm image, no amount of image processing or Photoshop or whatever can give you this image back. Okay, so you have to really model it as a the error reduction plus total variation kind of problem. So the error penalty and total variation have to go hand in hand. Otherwise, this kind of imaging is not possible. And the error part, as you see, it models the physics of the problem. So modeling of the physics is important, and also the expected result is what is the desired property of image, that is also important. And so computational imaging is really very interesting and making big difference in all kinds of problems that you can imagine, where the algorithm cannot live on its own. See, in the old image processing world, the algorithm could live on its own, meaning the image gathering was a separate activity and applying the algorithm was a separate activity. But now somehow the image data gathering and the acquiring, constructing the image back is very important. And so here, what is important here in terms of data gathering? What do you think would have gone into the hardware design of these antennas? See, the placement of these antennas is very important, isn't it? If I had chosen to place all these antennas in such a way that I cannot cover this Fourier space this way, then I will have no way to recover the image. If I just measured a small part of Fourier space very densely, that is not sufficient for me to reconstruct the image. So spreading out this, the antennas in such a way that I can get this data, meaning the consideration of, why this was done is mainly because, I can get more frequency coverage, but at the same time, there is a belief that, if you have this kind of data, then image reconstruction will also be possible. So design of hardware is number one thing. And the second thing is, to be able to recover an interesting image out of it. That is also, so both the things are important. The hardware is important, algorithm is also important, okay? But combined, you can get such results that are really at the forefront of science today. And so what we are learning, I may show you simple images like cameraman or, the IIT Delhi logo or things like that. But the same principle is going into in much bigger experiments. So what I want to say also is that many of you may be wanting to do high-end research. And the point is, if you learn to code this, with simple examples, the same principles with much more complication can also actually lead you to new research ideas. So the thing is, before this kind of algorithms evolved, if you told me that I can get this image, you would say, well, it is not possible. My data is not sufficient. I have an incomplete data problem. So this kind of device is not possible. But the moment you actually design such algorithms, the device becomes possible actually. Okay, so this is very, very important message I want to give you, that that it's not just that the computation or numerical processing is allowing you to just simulate something, but the whole working of the system itself depends on computation. The existence of this device itself depends on your ability to compute these things. Otherwise, this device will not be possible in the first place. Okay, so I want to give a bigger message here, that there is a system level implications for what we are learning here. So the first thing is, can we build imaging systems that measure much less, but practically have same function as you look at hardware plus algorithm together? And so if the computation is cheap enough, you can make the technology. So there are two things. Number one is, you can make the technology accessible by reducing cost. So a much higher cost device can become much cheaper by making less measurements and then enabling an application at lower cost. But then second exciting possibility is, you can push the boundaries of where science is. Okay, so you can use computation to make push the physics limits. So the physics limit traditionally did not think about such algorithms, and so you could never have gotten such images. But now you are essentially able to push the physics limits, and so I think both the paths are exciting. Okay, so number one is, I can push the limits of what I can get in my science. That is very much, we all love that. But the second part is also very good because it has a very high societal impact, immediate impact. And so any of these problems you can kind of jump into. Whichever you find is exciting, you can do some contribution to it. If you get into any area that is allied, and you can design algorithms like that, and enable existence of such systems. Okay, so this is my kind of message out of this lecture, because I wanted to show you that what we are learning is actually currently being used in really very, very advanced technology and science both. Okay, So we have, I think we don't have class till next week. And so I think it's also a little bit food for thought. I have posted one homework online, but I'll probably give you a little more time for it. I've not set any deadline. It is about Wiener filter. So I want you to, while you are kind of thinking about all these compressive sensing and optimization techniques, you can try to go back to what we learned earlier on Wiener filter and try to implement it for yourself. The later exercises, I will also focus on some of these optimization problems. Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, in the previous slide,
Yeah.
sir, you have said about the spatial extension of the frequencies. Now, if I want to cover more and more frequencies, that
Yes.
means I have to locate the antennas over a wider area. Is it
Yes.
so? Or
Yes.
can we do that by?
So now you have to put the antenna on a satellite and have a baseline which is bigger than
Frequencies means
Earth's diameter.
larger
Right?
extent of frequencies.
Yeah. So if you can design satellites such that each one carries an antenna and put them in space now, and their extent is much bigger than Earth's diameter, then yes, you can get. See, this picture you see really has no resolution, isn't it? Meaning it has come out of total variation, very heavy total variation. And so, yeah, there is a plan I've heard in European Space Agency to send antennas outside Earth on satellites now, so that they can collect data at an even larger baseline. And so maybe you can see more details in the image in future. But such missions will take 10 years, 20 years to realize. It's not such a straightforward thing.
Sir,
So
one
we have to
more thing.
appreciate both the things, meaning the algorithm we have to appreciate, but we also have to appreciate the efforts that go into even building such things. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sir, one more thing. Sir, in the 2 slides back, so we have the gamma function that you said is a function of R1 minus R2.
Yeah.
That is a coherent function, but the
Is the
Ix dash
coherence
y dash, it's a coherent function, but
Yes.
the Ix dash y dash, it's an incoherent function.
Yes, yes.
So means how can we how we go from an incoherent function to a coherent function? Is it through only
Okay.
Fourier transform? I'm not clear with that.
No. So maybe that's an interesting question for the statistical optics class. But since you have asked it right now, I will explain it next class for 10 minutes, because I think it's an important question, that how come an incoherent source even had a coherence by the time the radiation came to Earth, isn't it? So it's an important question, and I will explain a little bit. But you see that you know that when you look at stars, they twinkle, but the planets don't twinkle. You know why that is so?
Yes, sir.
Why? Tell me.
So a star has its own source of light, but planet is
Yeah, but
when the
that's a
light
completely
falls on the
wrong
planet.
explanation of that. That it doesn't mean one should twinkle and other should not twinkle. Meaning, those twinkling effects are actually meaning fluctuations in atmosphere. But why is these are essentially interference effects because of atmosphere when you are looking at the star. Okay. And why is the wavefront from star coherent in the first place? That is what is told by this Van Sittard-Zernike theorem. But I will, since we are over time right now, in the next class I will take 10 minutes and explain why does an incoherent source develop coherence when you propagate that far. Okay. So it's my promise I will make a few slides on it and just give you an explanation. So the reason why stars twinkle and planets don't twinkle is that planets are kind of close by, and so the coherence is not large enough to show these interference effects. But the stars are pretty far, and so the wavefront by the time it comes to Earth is almost like a plane wave. Okay, but why that is so, I will explain in the next class. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
But you understand that there is really no fully incoherent source. light can be incoherent at the source, but once it propagates, it always develops some coherence. Okay, so this is a very interesting result which has been known for decades now, but we kind of tend to think that incoherent means everything is incoherent. Okay, so that is a problem. And anyway, I will discuss this a little bit in the next class. Okay, right now we are going out of time.
Okay, sir.
All right. Yeah. So can we stop here? I hope you have some food for thought. Okay. And I will post both the lectures from yesterday and today by today evening. Okay.